Hello friends, this is Michelle at East Ave Art, and today I'm going to be showing you how I created this card using watercolor and gouache. To start, my supplies are this tracing paper where I will sketch out the light bulb and then, transfer it over to my watercolor paper. I just cut this piece out of this sort of bigger pad. And so this is Arch's 140 pound, 100% cotton watercolor paper, and it's the cold pressed. And so I'll be using that watercolor paper. I have 2 jars of clean water. I have my watercolor brushes that I can choose from. And then this is my 48 pan set of Mungyo watercolors. And I use this sort of spray bottle just to keep my paints activated with water. Also, I'm going to be using this Winsor & Newton art masking fluid. And let's see what else. 2 paper towels or a stack of paper towels. Also, I'm going to be using some washi tape for the edges and a pencil and eraser. So let's get started. So I start sketching out the light bulb shape on tracing paper, and then I'll transfer that over to the watercolor paper once I'm happy with it. So you can see me adding some graphite to the back there, and then I'll transfer it over to the watercolor itself, the watercolor paper itself. And once I move over to my Arches watercolor paper, I start taping down the edges with some washi tape. I thought this tape was kind of fun. It's like little Christmas illustrations on there. So perfect for this time of year. And so that's going to protect my borders and give me that nice clean edge. And so I'm just making sure that I tape this down firmly. And now I can take my light bulb, and it's like a little template, and I can just trace it as many times as I'd like. And I have like a consistent look then to my light bulbs. And a big reason why I like to actually do my sketch on paper that's not what I end up painting on is because this is 100% cotton and it doesn't take that well to erasing. So that's kind of a good reason for that. Now you can see that I've taken out my art masking fluid, and I'm actually just painting with the masking fluid inside all of my light bulbs because the masking fluid serves as a protective barrier. So anything that's underneath it will not be affected by the paint. So I'm going to actually be painting over this whole area or the whole background. And I don't really want to take the time to paint around the light bulbs. So this is just like a really nice time saver. So I'll paint all of these in with the masking fluid, and you can kind of see my brush is not in the best of condition. This is like my dedicated art masking fluid brush. I mean, some people say that you can clean off the masking fluid once you've applied it, but it just never fully comes off for me. It's kind of just like a rubbery substance, and it just kind of ruins the brush. So I've just kind of kept like a dedicated brush devoted to just this medium. And so then I'll wait for this to dry, and once it dries I can go ahead and paint the background, paint over it, and it won't get through underneath the masking fluid. So I've waited for my masking fluid to dry completely, and now I'm going in with a mop brush and just adding a lot of water. I'm getting the whole background dry, and again, that masking fluid is going to prevent any of this paint that I'm about to apply to going where it's covering up the paper. And I also have mixed up this indigo. I'm checking the sheen right there. You saw I lift that up just to kind of see whether I have full coverage on the paper. That's a nice little trick. You can always tell if there's water on the paper because it's nice and shiny. So I got all of my background wet, and I'm really quickly laying down this indigo. And part of the reason why I wanted this to be really wet with like the wet background and the wet paint is because I'm wanting to get some like soft natural blends. So ultimately my hope is that around the light, the bulbs, it'll be a little bit lighter and a little bit darker as it gets further away. And one way that you can achieve that is by working quickly and painting wet into wet, as you see me doing here. Okay, so that color looks a little bit consistent on the background. So you see me dropping in some just clean water on my brush, and what that water is going to do is it's going to repel the paint. So you can already see some of the lightness kind of emanating from putting that water in. And you know, you got to be kind of trial and error, test things out a little bit. Like I didn't want to have the water go as far as I did. That first drop I think that I put on was like a little bit thicker than I wanted it to be. And now you're going to see me mixing up some of the colors for the Christmas light. So I want there to be a blur coming off of the light that's like blurring into the sky. So I'm just, while that paper is really, really wet, I'm just dropping in bits of red. I'll drop in bits of the blue, the kind of the Christmassy blue there. You can see it's pretty different from the indigo. And then I'm going to drop in some green. Now, the red felt like it got a little bit further away, and so what I can do is just with a clean brush kind of mop things back up a little bit. And one of the things that I found actually with this, I think I got a little too aggressive with mopping the color up, because one of the things to keep in mind with watercolor that I did not keep in mind is that it dries a lot lighter than it is, or than it looks when it's wet. So it's gonna be, I found that these colors, I could have just let them be a little bit more dramatic in their wet stage, and I think I would have been happier with the product. And you can see as I go, I keep kind of meddling with it a little bit. I keep dropping in some of the clean water, and then coming in with a little bit more of the color. I think I got a little too picky about this, but one thing that I was happy with is the distinction between the very far background, like the sky, and sort of the brightness around the lights. I was kind of happy with how smooth that transition looks. So I kept playing around with this background as it was drying, and I'll just kind of put some music on and let you watch how much I sort of had to work on this until I got it how I wanted it to look. Okay, so again, I feel kind of like my around the lights, those colors didn't really stand out as well. But now what I'm doing is, I do go back and fix that, by the way, but and I'll show that later. But now what I'm doing is I'm just dropping in, while it's somewhat dry, it's kind of drying, I'm going in with again, just dabs of clean water, and I'm dropping it in, and I'm trying to get like a little like snowflakey light like effect there. I wasn't super happy with one of them, but I ended up adjusting it. And you see, I'm about to do that there. That was my first drop, and I just thought it was like I had too much water there. So I'm going in a little bit more conservatively here. And I waited for my background to dry, and as you can see, it dries a lot lighter. Definitely something to keep in mind with watercolor. So now I'm actually going to be pulling up the art masking fluid with just a simple eraser. This one took me a little bit more longer than I thought it was going to. And so now that I have all of the masking fluid removed, you can see it's pretty, kept everything pretty clean, right? So now I'm going to go in just with like the colors that I want to paint each of the light bulbs as. And, you know, sadly, I'm really disappointed that you can't see the kind of red blur that I was hoping for. I think the blue and the green stayed pretty consistent. I was happy with that. So I'm just doing this base color in watercolor, but I am going to transition to gouache in just a little bit once all of this dries. And while I was waiting for that to dry, I pulled out my HIMI Gouache set, and I love this set. I think it's super cute, lots of different colors, and I'm using a palette knife just to get all of the colors that I want to use on the palette. I saw that as a suggestion from somewhere that this is like a great way not to introduce like organisms or anything that's going to make your jelly gouache sort of start being full of germs anyway. So this is, I think, to keep the integrity of the gouache. And once I pick out all of my colors, I'm ready to start painting. So I start with just like a base, like very simple red. And I think I'm going to end up using that on the whole light bulb. At first, I kind of thought I was going to use some of the watercolor because it's like a little bit flatter as like a highlight, but I didn't really end up going in that direction, so that was somewhat of a wasted step, unfortunately. But you know, you just kind of live and you learn. So I also had gotten like a little bit of a darker red and a brown that I'm ultimately going to use for shadows on this light. So part of what's going to make this light look like a light is sort of the dichotomy between the shadow and the lightness. So you see I mixed in some brown and some of the darker red, and I'm kind of adding in some shadows just where I like to add a little bit of where some parts of the light aren't as glowy as the rest of it, and that's going to give it sort of more of a realistic feel. And I just kind of do this by instinct. I try to have some of the dark bits around sort of the bottom of the light, because I think if you look at these actual lights, the light that's inside of it is closer to the top. So I think the dark spots really usually are on the bottom. And then sort of towards the top where it comes into whatever the black part that attaches to the wire, I guess. I don't know the names of lights. So that's kind of my first sort of few things that I put onto the red bulb, and I'll go in with some of the highlights later. And I'm going to follow the same process with the blue light, right? I'm going to put down what I feel like is the base color. And again, I'm just filling in the whole light bulb, unfortunately. It just didn't really do a good job. I think the watercolors didn't stand out quite enough against the indigo background. So I'm going in the same process that I'm going to follow for both the green and the blue lights, where I'm going to have sort of just a base color, and then I'm going to first add in the dark colors, the shadow colors of the light. this point, I'm experimenting with mixing up some lighter colors to go to serve as the highlights for this. So I'm playing around with like a red. At first, I was kind of unhappy. For example, like this kind of my first mixes kind of seemed a little bit pink, and that really wasn't what I was going for. So I started playing around with yellow, and this was kind of the first color I went in with. It didn't really stand out quite as much, but I decided to just paint in the highlights that I wanted to paint in, and then I can always just go over that with a different color. But I at least wanted to map out where those highlights were going to go. Okay, and I keep kind of trying to add in lighter highlights in on the blue. I just kind of worked that out, and I'm going to move on to the green after I finish the blue. And right now I'm just kind of putting some straight up white on there because I just sort of want to see how it looks. So this part's a little bit more experimental, and I'm just kind of seeing trial and error, what looks natural to me, what's giving me the sense that it's glowing. All right, so in this section I have a bunch of highlights established, and now I'm going over that, some of it with the white gouache, just to see how that will look a little bit more of an intense reflection. And I'm just going to keep playing around with the highlights and building it up and see where I end up. Okay, and at this point I decided to use some black gouache and put in like the cap or whatever to the light, and I did this for all three of them, so I'm going to just skip over this. Kind of tedious watching me do this for all three. And now that I finished that, I started working on just the wire that's connecting all of the lights together. At this point, I took some white gouache and I'm just making some like star shapes in the areas where I dropped in some of that clean water, just kind of create the little like snow effect. And so I thought I'd put some little like snowflakes in there in those little spots as well. So I'm just kind of doing that with white gouache, and then I'm adding the little snowflakes to other areas as well, just to kind of give a little bit of visual interest here. And once I finished that, I loaded up my brush with some more paint, and I'm just tapping it over my painting just to get some more snowflakes. And with that comes the fun part of taking off the washi tape to reveal that nice border. And then I'm going to go in with a fine liner and write in Merry and Bright in my cursive. And then you can also see I'm trying to do a little bit of what's called faux calligraphy. I'm just thickening the downstroke. So a downstroke is when you're writing in cursive, the pen goes towards you. You would thicken that downstroke. That's what a downstroke is called. So I kind of just cheat a little bit to get this. So you can see I'm just putting like the thickening part on, and then I'll go in and fill that in with some black gouache, just to kind of save my pen. Okay, and here is my final product. So hopefully you enjoyed this, and if you liked it, please hit like and subscribe. Thanks so much for watching. Take care. We'll see you again.